Okay. So I think I should be live now. Hi, can you see me, people? Yep, great. I think I'm there. I can see people's comments coming in. Fantastic. I'm a minute or two early, so I'm not going to get cracking on yet. The really important thing, thanks, Tara. The really important thing for this session is that you need to be able to see the questions and the text that I'm going to talk about. So there should be a link in the description of this video. I'm not such an expert on Facebook Lives that I can be sure that there is, but I know that Saba has also posted the link to the resources I'm going to be talking about. Let's see whether I can get that into the comments here. Yeah, okay. So I've just posted a comment which has, oh, apparently I can't post it because the link looks like spam. Perhaps Saba will be able to post a link to the resources that I'm going to be talking about. Anyway, it's very important you have those open. Ideally, print them out, and if not, you can look at them on the screen. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be talking through the first paper from my first book of multiple choice comprehension tasks. I'm not going to go through all of it because there won't be time, because I tend to talk for too long. But what I'm really going to focus on is going through some questions and showing you the techniques that you can use, how I would go about working out the answers to these questions. And what I really want to focus on is how you can deal with questions when you aren't quite sure what's going on, when you have to make judgments about words that you perhaps don't know perfectly, that sort of thing. So it's 1 minute past 6, so I think we can get started with talking about the questions. So this passage is taken from a very famous book, or a book that used to be very famous and very popular with children and adults quite a long time ago, but it's still read by many people, and it's a story about dogs and wolves and humans in the wilds of Canada and the United States. I can see that Ritika has posted what's the link. Oh, great, Saba's just replied, fantastic. If you click on that, there'll be a file to download. You'll be able to view the file on your computer, but that might make it hard to see both the text and the questions. So in an ideal world, if you can, I would actually print out the file, or at least print out the part of the file with the text and the questions, and then you can always just look back at the answers later, because I'm not going to look at those right now. Okay, so let's look at question 1, which says, what is meant by the phrase with spirits that were fairly light? Let's see whether I can bring the text and the, you can tell I'm such an expert with this. Let's see whether I can bring up the text and the questions on the screen. Here we are. So let's share screen. In fact, let's share the questions here. Okay, so I'm going to share the questions, and I'm going to hang on a sec. I can share more than one thing. That's amazing. Okay, good. Brilliant. Right. I'm now sharing the text and the questions. Miracle. Okay. So the first question says, what is meant by the phrase with spirits that were fairly light, in lines 2 to 3? So we can see that the text says, the day began auspiciously. They had lost no dogs during the night, and they swung out upon the trail and into the silence, the darkness, and the cold, with spirits that were fairly light. Bill seemed to have forgotten his forebodings of the previous night, and so on. And we've got 4 options here, and some multiple choice exams will give you 4 options, some will give you 5. If you know the rest of this book, you'll see that some of the passages, some of the exercises have 4 option questions and some have 5 option questions. It doesn't really make any difference to the technique. So the first option says the men have drunk most of the whiskey in their bottles. Well, we know that spirits can mean whiskey. It would seem a bit strange to say with spirits that were fairly light when you could say with bottles that were fairly light. So for the first option, it seems to me that it's not completely impossible, but it would be a bit strange. And so if I were doing an exam, I might start off by writing, maybe by writing a question mark next to option A. Next option, the men are full of jollity and enthusiasm. Well, you probably know that having light spirits can mean to be happy, to feel positive. So that's definitely a possibility, and one not to cross out at this point. Next one, the men feel a dark foreboding, option 3. Now, let's say that you don't know the meaning of the word foreboding, but the word dark, the men feel a dark something. In that context, the adjective dark tends to imply something negative. And so we can go back to the quotation with spirits that were fairly light, which doesn't really match the idea of something negative. And we can see that the other things that are said here are quite positive. They've lost no dogs. Bill has forgotten his forebodings. And we know that forebodings are something dark from option C. So he's not feeling negative. So nothing in here seems to match the idea of something. Hang on, that was a bit circular, that reasoning, ignore that. But anyway, there's nothing in the passage or in the quotation to suggest that the men feel negative. So we can probably cross out option C. And one of the most important things that you can do when doing multiple choice is to cross out options that aren't good so that you can reduce the possibilities from which to choose. And then the last one, the men feel reasonably positive and relaxed. And as we've already said, light spirits seem to match the idea of being in some way positive. So what are we left with? We've crossed out C. We've got A, which we couldn't completely rule out, but seemed a bit odd. And then we've got B and D, both of which look like potentially quite good matches. And so at this point, when we've got 3 options and one of them is much less good than the others, we can probably cross that out. And so now we can cross out option A. And now we're left with the choice between B and D. So option B says the men are full of jollity and enthusiasm, and option D says the men feel reasonably positive and relaxed. So we have to consider what the main difference is between these choices before we can choose between them. And for me, the main difference is between the phrase full of in B and the word reasonably in D. So are they feeling full of positivity, or are they just reasonably positive? And now we look back at the quotation with spirits that were fairly light. And for me, fairly is a much better match for reasonably than it is for full of. And so, even if we aren't completely certain about the meaning of the text and we don't know all of the words involved, we can pretty safely settle on option D, that the men feel reasonably positive and relaxed. So just to show you what my own working paper looks like here. So you'll probably see this backwards, but anyway, you can see that I crossed out option C. Then after a later bit of reasoning, I've crossed out option A. And then I focused on the key differences between B and D. And the differences are between full of and reasonably, which I've circled. Then I've circled the key word in the question that goes with those, and that's enabled me to make my decision. So I've circled the answer, and finally, I've written it in the box. So everything is extremely systematic. Right, I'm now just quickly going to check back at your comments to see whether there's anything there. Great, I can see everyone's piling in with option D. What I'm going to do, I'm going to check the comments after each question I've gone through, if I can. I can only see, okay, I'm a little bit lost here because I'm trying to see the comments, but I can only see 4 comments. So I'm guessing there's some way to pop out this live. I'm stuck. Okay, I'm not going to answer questions because I can't see the questions. If anyone's able to write a quick comment telling me how to view all the comments, I will love you forever. But I'm going to move on to the next question now. Okay, so Let's have a look at question 2. This is going well. So which option best conveys Bill's first reaction when the sled overturns? And if you've got any more questions to ask me, do ask me in the comments. And I think Saba's very kindly passing on any important questions via messages. Yeah, thanks, Saba. Right, okay, let's try and be more efficient. Which option best conveys Bill's first reaction when the sled overturns? So first thing we need to do is look at the passage and find the most relevant information. And if I only get through 3 or 4 questions here, there are already some very, very important lessons to take on board. And one of those lessons is that you should always look back at the passage. One of the main mistakes that people make is that they read the passage and then think, right, I know what's going on, and then they power through the questions. And that means they fall into all the traps that, that the examiner has set. So always look back at the passage before each question, even if only briefly. I know time's at a premium, but the best way to move quickly is to do it right at each step. So, Bill seemed to have forgotten his forebodings of the previous night and even waxed facetious with the dogs when, at midday, they overturned the sled on a bad piece of trail. So we know we need to consider Bill's reaction here. Before we jump into the options, let's think about what's going on in this sentence and understand it as best we can ourselves. So Bill seemed to have forgotten his forebodings of the previous night. Now, if you know that forebodings means worries, then you're flying, because you know that Bill is feeling positive because he doesn't feel the worry that he had, the worries that he felt before. If you don't know what forebodings means, it's a little bit trickier. But then we already know from working on question 1 that the second sentence talks about them having light spirits, which means that they felt quite good. And Bill seemed to have forgotten his forebodings is continuing this idea. There isn't a but or a however or anything like that. So this is obviously about Bill feeling positive. And he even waxed facetious with the dogs when they tipped the sled over. Now, and even is a phrase that adds to an idea. So everything here is adding up. So even if you don't know what forebodings means, and even if you don't know what waxed facetious means, you should still be able to work out from the way that this is all joined together that everything is increasingly positive. They're in light spirits. Bill has forgotten some kind of bad feeling, and he even did something positive with the dogs when the sledge tipped over. So that tells us a lot. Let's look at the question. Option A, he forgets his good mood and is furious. That doesn't fit with the phrase and even, which means that he continued to feel good. So in fact, it suggests that it's surprising that even though the sled turned over, he didn't go crazy with anger. So we can cross out option A because he is not furious. Option B, because he's in a good mood, he greets the accident with amusement. Well, that seems like a really reasonable answer based on what you've just said. Tara, that's absolutely correct. That is very much what facetious means. Because he's in a good mood, he greets the accident with amusement. So that looks like the right answer, but don't make the mistake of jumping in with the first thing that looks right, because there might be another option that's better. And your task is in a multiple choice comprehension exam is not to choose the right answer so much as to choose the best answer. And sometimes there will be 2 or even 3 right answers, but one of them will be better, more precise, more accurate than the others. So we like option B, but do not circle it just yet. Option C, he's horrified. No, we've spoken about that enough. He is not horrified. Option D, he is in a bad mood, but still manages to see the funny side. Well, that isn't completely unreasonable. So let's consider B and D. Option B, he's in a good mood and is amused. Option D, he's in a bad mood, but still laughs about it. Well, we've gone through this in some detail. Is there anything here to suggest that Bill is in a bad mood? He seems to have forgotten some kind of bad mood, And even wax facetious, which we know means something positive, as someone's pointed out in the comments, what it really means is joked about, with the dogs when they overturned the sled. So there's nothing to suggest that Bill's in a bad mood. There's lots of reason to think he's in a good mood. So this leads us to consider B as the more likely answer. So we go for option B. So here, again, lessons learned. First lesson, always check back to the passage. Second lesson, go through systematically through the options, crossing out the things that aren't possible answers. Third lesson, don't just jump in and select the first option that looks correct. Take your time to look at the other options. However rushed you feel in an exam, if you have a good system and you're used to using it and you can move through it smoothly and steadily, you'll get through the exam in time. If you jump around guessing at this, trying that, then changing your mind, trying to guess the answer without looking at the passage, then realizing you should have looked at the passage and panicking and jumping back, that's when you run out of time and don't finish an exam. And then, as we saw with the previous question, once you've reduced your options to 2, possibly, that could be the right answer, then you need to focus on what the difference is between them. And here the main difference is between whether he's in a good mood or a bad mood before he jokes around. Then focus on the question in the passage and use that to help you choose between those options. Great. Okay. Yeah, Saba, do let me know if there are any good questions that come in. And again, if there's a way to, maybe if I click on View Insights, that'll let me see the comments. I'm really keen to see people's comments as they come in. No, that is not doing it. I'm not going to say any rude words, but I really would like to at this point. Oh, well, okay. Carrying on. Someone's already given the answers to question 3. Great, let's see. Okay. So option 3, which of these things is not stated in paragraph 2? Right, the most important thing about a question including a negative is do not miss it. I've been helpful here and I've put not in bold, so it's quite hard to miss. Words like not or isn't or aren't will not always be highlighted in bold. And if you're powering through a comprehension exam, desperately trying to get to the end, it's really easy to miss that crucial word and do the exact opposite of what's being specified. So which of these things is not stated? I did just see a question flash past there. Someone said, please explain the crucial words as you go along. I'm deliberately not focusing on that because what I'm here to do is to explain how to do a question paper or an exam paper effectively. And the thing is, when you're in an exam, if you come across a word that you don't know, you've got no way to find out what it means apart from working out roughly what it means based on the passage. You can't open a dictionary. You can't stop someone and say, hey, what does this word mean? There isn't an option like that. And so dealing with words that you don't know and things that you don't quite understand is an absolutely crucial part of doing an exam, which is what we're dealing with today. And I think one important thing to say there is that however many words you learn between now and your 11 plus exam, there will almost certainly be some words in the exam that you don't know or that you don't know well and precisely. And so what you need to do is practice dealing with unfamiliar words. And that's what we're talking about today. So it was a very reasonable thing to ask, but you need to think in terms of dealing with unfamiliar words, not just knowing them. Okay, which of these things is not stated in paragraph 2? I'm not going to read the whole of the paragraph out to you. That would be a waste of time. But again, in a situation like this, you probably need to quickly skim through the paragraph before you answer the question. That means reading it really quickly, just have a sense of what's in there, not stopping to analyze every word, because if you do that with whole paragraphs every time, then you will probably run out of time in an exam. So, a dog begins to sneak away. We see at the end, Henry observed one ear sidling away. And because you've already read through the passage once before you started answering the questions, you know that one ear is a dog. And therefore, yes, a dog does begin to sneak away. So we can cross out A. You might not know the word sidelink, but it should be fairly clear. Henry observes one ear somethinging away, that the dog is sneaking away. Okay. The sled is trapped between two objects. The sled was upside down and jammed between a tree trunk and a huge rock. These are both objects. It's jammed between them. That means trapped between. So B is stated in paragraph 2. We can cross that one out. The men have to use the dogs to try and pull the sled free. They were forced to unharness the dogs in order to straighten out the tangle. So it wouldn't really make sense for them to unharness the dogs if what they wanted was for the dogs to pull the sled free, because they'd need a harness or some kind of rope on the dogs to pull it away. So that does not seem to be in paragraph 3, because in fact the men are bent over trying to right the sled themselves. So if you know what the word harness and here the word unharness mean, then that's going to help you a lot. But even if you don't, the next sentence saying that the men are bent over trying to do it themselves should be a really strong clue that that the dogs are not being used here. So C is probably the answer. But remember the lesson from the previous question. Don't just jump in, check the rest of the options. Freeing the sled is a complex job. Well, that isn't stated, but it is implied. It's awkward, it's a mix-up. They have to untie the dogs before they can do anything. They have to bend over the sled. They don't bend over the sled and sort it out. They bend over the sled and try to sort it out in line 8. All of these things suggest that it's difficult and, by implication, complex. So D, even if it isn't directly stated, so we're kind of on the edge of the exact meaning of the question, it does seem to be in the paragraph. So that one we can probably cross out. And I, in an exam, would probably do a squiggly line cross out on that or something like that, just to show that it's probably not the answer, but I'm not absolutely certain. When we come back to C, the men have to use the dogs to try and pull the sled free. Well, that definitely isn't true. So even if D is a little bit ambiguous, C is absolutely not in that paragraph. And so we can select C. Okay. I talked about reading the passage and when you should do it. I think this might be a moment just to stop on that a second. So people often wonder when they should read the passage and when they should read the questions. Now, in an ideal world, if your exam was not timed, then what I would suggest is that you first of all read the passage very carefully from beginning to end, then read through all the questions, getting a general sense of what they're asking, understanding what's going on, having some first thoughts, and then when you come to each question, you then carefully reread the relevant part of the passage. Now, in an exam, if you do all of those steps at the beginning, you are going to be pushing your timing a bit more than is wise. So I would cut out some of that. The first thing that I would do is, yes, that I would read the passage. I would read the passage in enough detail to understand what's going on, who the characters are, because who's doing what when is one of the easiest things to miss and one of the things that can most directly lead to mistakes. So I'd read the passage in enough detail to understand it, but not analysing every single word and sentence. A kind of middle ground between reading it very slowly and skimming through it. Then I probably would not read all the questions, because you are going to see the questions anyway when you come to them. And that's one of those things that you would do in an ideal world, but there probably isn't time for in an exam. So I'd read through the passage, medium pace. Then I'd go to the first question, straight on. And then I would go back to the relevant part of the passage. So question 1, for example, talks about lines 2 to 3. I would skim read the first paragraph. By that, I really mean skim. I just mean get enough of a quick overview to remind myself of what I read when I read it the first time. And then I really carefully read the sentence that we're focusing on. So I'd really carefully read lines 1, 2, and 3. And then I base my answer on that. So it does need a lot of care and attention in your reading, but you can't do absolutely everything. Right, okay, on to question 4. I realized that I forgot to share the screen last time. Let's put that right. So here we are. So we're looking at question 4, and let's zoom in. Great, I've done something that works, almost. Okay, so One Ear runs away because he doesn't want to help free the sled. He wants to meet a female wolf whose presence he has sensed. He's cautious. He is trying to steal the traces. Okay, so quite a wide range of options there. Now, this question does not tell you which lines you need to focus on. So this is a really good reason why it's worth reading the passage with a reasonable degree of care before you answer the questions, because otherwise you may not be able to find where things happen. So where does One Ear run away? Well, we first see One Ear running away in line 9. Then Henry calls out to One Ear to try and make him come back, but One Ear carries on in line 11, but still we aren't quite sure why. And then line 12, you get a first clue. There out in the snow of their backtrack was the she-wolf waiting for him. And I think the backtrack will mean the track left behind them, where they've just been. As he neared her, he became suddenly cautious. Okay, so we still aren't sure exactly whether One Ear is running towards the she-wolf, this female wolf, or whether she just happens to be in the place that he's running to. So he slows down, and he regarded her carefully and dubiously, yet desirefully. So now we got a clue that One Ear wants to go towards this wolf. And then later on we see One Ear drew near to her and then tried to sniff noses with her. Now, if you hadn't read the passage before answering the questions, it would take a very long time to read through all that. But because you've already read the passage, you can just skip through it looking for the clues that are relevant to answering this question. You can spot those things very carefully. So, One Ear runs away because he doesn't want to help free the sled. Well, there's nothing to suggest that. And what's more, we know from question 3 that the men weren't using the dogs to free the sled. In fact, they untied the dogs and then tried to do it themselves. So, for A, we can cross out. He wants to meet a female wolf whose presence he has sensed. Well, we see that one wolf looks at the wolf desirefully and then tries to sniff noses. So that's a really likely option. In fact, it's probably the right answer, but we'll check the rest. One Ear runs away because he is cautious. Well, there's one reference to One Ear being cautious, and that's in line 13. But that isn't to do with why One Ear runs away. That's what happens when he's already run away and he's heading towards the female wolf. So it's in a different context. And really, if you think about it, if One Ear was cautious, if he was careful, the sensible thing to do would be for him to stay with the humans with the sled, but he doesn't. So One Ear is not being cautious here. He is doing something very silly. So C is not the right answer either. Okay, D, he's trying to steal the traces. Well, that just looks plain weird, but weird answers can be correct. Is there a reference in the passage to the word traces? Yes, 11. But One Ear broke into a run across the snow, his traces trailing behind him. So you may not know what traces means. And if you don't know what it means, then it may be a little tricky and you might be tempted by option D. And sometimes if you don't know a word, it will bring your solution a little bit closer to a guess. However, there is only one reference to this thing, these traces. That's in line 11. There's nothing else to imply that One Ear is trying to take something away with him. Everything else is about him approaching this she-wolf, this female wolf. So just from the general thrust of the context of the passage of what's going on, you're likely to feel that B is a much more likely answer. Now, if you know what the traces means, if you realize that these are the bits of harness from the sled that One Ear still has attached to him after he's been untied, then you'll realize that this is completely coincidental. There's no reason why the dog would want to steal these things. He's just stuck with them. They're attached to him. Anyway, so a sensible guess will lead you to B, but knowing what the key word in D means will absolutely clearly lead you to option B. Okay, great. So you can see at this point that that my answer page is, oh, I should know by now that pushing it closer doesn't make it easy to read. There we are. That my answer page is full of annotations, but they're quite a consistent kind of annotation. There are crossings out, which is normally the first stage of my going through the options. There are circlings of words in the options and in the question, where I'm matching key ideas together and comparing them. There are circlings of answers, and of course, I've written the answer in the answer space. Or, as may be the case in some exams, you might find yourself marking the answer on an answer sheet, which you're given separately. Again, in an ideal world, it would often be most sensible to mark all your answers on by the questions, as I've done here, writing D, B, A, and so on, and then go in and mark them all on the answer sheet at the end, because that's more systematic, it will save you time. However, that approach can be a little bit dangerous, because what happens if you lose track of time, you haven't written any answers onto your official answer sheet, and then the bell goes ding dong, it's the end of the exam, and you don't have any answers written there. And then you're in a real pickle, probably to the extent of failing the exam. So I would suggest that if you have a separate answer sheet that you need to use, where you need to cross off the letter for each answer. And by the way, if you buy the book, there's a set of those answer sheets in the back, so you can practice it. What I would suggest is that as soon as you're sure of the answer to a question, that you do mark it on the answer sheet straight away, or at least that every 3 or 4 questions, you mark the answers to those questions on the answer sheet. And that way, when it comes to the end of the exam, you'll definitely have a really good stock of questions marked. Great, thank you to Saba, who's feeding the important questions. Sarah's written something here that looks interesting. She's written, annotating the answer page is an amazing method of comprehension. You can clearly see that it demonstrates examples of clear and concise working. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Good, excellent. I'm glad we're in agreement. If anyone's in disagreement with what I say, please do say so, because you might well be right. And if I think I'm right, then I should explain to you why. Okay, pushing on. I think we're probably going to get through maybe another one comprehension question, and then we might have a quick look at one of the language questions that come later in the paper, 1 or 2 of those. Which question should we look at next? Okay, let's have a look. Let's skip forward. I'd like to look at question 12 because it's a little bit different. It's quite hard, and it involves a lot of thought about the text. Sia has just written how to deal with unfamiliar words. I'm trying to cover that as I go, and I did discuss it a little bit before, but it's such an important question, I will recapitulate a bit. When a word is unfamiliar, do not panic, is the first thing to say, because there will be unfamiliar words. You need to get the best sense of what that word means from the context. So what I'm suggesting is something between completely ignoring it and guessing wildly. Yes, someone's asked me to share the screen. I will share the screen for this question in just a sec when I finished waffling on in a general way. What was I saying? Yeah, so what you need to do is you need to, first of all, look at the word and consider whether there's anything in it that might give you a clue. Because often you don't know a word, but you do know a word that's pretty similar to it. I'm trying to think of an example. Nothing ever comes to mind when you want it to, does it? Anyway, that's true of many words. But the most useful thing you can do is look at the context. So just going back to what we said about question 1, you might not have known the word foreboding, which is in line 3. But we can see that the whole context is about people getting on with life, things being fairly positive, people having light spirits. So in that context, Bill has forgotten his forebodings of the previous night. That implies that forebodings are some sort of bad thing, a bad feeling. And that gives you a really good clue, even if you don't know what it means. And he even waxed facetious with the dogs when a bad thing happened. So he didn't feel too bad, and he even did something or other, even though a bad thing happened. So we know that waxing facetious must be something to do with positive action, even happiness. So even if you don't know that waxed facetious means became humorous, played around, joked around, you can still get a really good sense that's likely to guide you through. Dimple says you can look at the tense of a word, and if it is a noun, adjective, verb, or adverb. Yes, indeed, that's also a really important thing to do. And that will help a lot. I should have mentioned that. Thank you. Okay, right. Carl, let's do another question. Okay, we're going to look at question 12. I said we would, and we might actually do it. So share screen, back to the wizardry. Share. Bingo. Okay, so we're going to scroll down and look at question 12. Here we are. Oh, goodness me. The joys of Adobe. Right, okay, so one ear was running around there. Right, so this refers to lines 59 to 60. I'm just going to scroll down to that. Of course, if you were doing this properly in order, you'd already be about that point in the comprehension. One thing that's worth saying, perhaps it's obvious, but maybe it isn't. In an exercise like this, in a comprehension, the questions almost invariably move through the passage in order. So if you don't know where something is in the text, look at where the information was for the previous question, look at where the information will be for the question after, and it's a pretty good guess that the information for the question you're looking at will come somewhere between. That is not always true. None of these things are always true, but that will be true in about 4 cases out, probably more, probably 9 cases out of 10. An exception to this is often when you come towards the end of a test, and you might get some more general questions that ask you about the passage in general, that ask you about character traits, about how the plot works, and then you can't rely on that. So it isn't an absolute rule, but it's a very good guide. Okay, back to the question. So this is a question that gives you a long quotation, and you can also see that some of the options are quite long. So it's a thinking broadly about ideas sort of question, which is what makes it difficult. And this is the sort of thing that challenges a lot of people. One ear was running on the outer circle, while the wolf pack was running on the inner and shorter circle. Circles of what? What are these circles? Why are they running on them? Is this some kind of race? Are they on bicycles? What is happening here? It's a very confusing scenario, and it takes a lot of imagination. So what does this mean? Let's have a look at the text. So I've got it up on the screen, but I'm looking at paper because I'm old-fashioned. So we know here that one ear is being chased by the wolves, because if you've read the rest of the text, which I'm sure you all have before this session, you'll know that what happens is one ear goes up and tries to make friends with this wolf, but it's a trap. And the other wolves all come out and then try to chase after one ear because they want to kill him. So one ear has been running away from these wolves. Bill runs off after them with his gun, trying to protect one ear. And Henry, who thinks that Bill is making a really stupid mistake, and he sits down on the sled and waits to see what happens. Henry sat down on the sled and watched. There was nothing else for him to do. And every now and then, if you look at line 57, one ear could be seen. Just now and again, appearing and disappearing. He's running away from the wolves. and Henry judged his case to be hopeless. In other words, Henry thought that One Ear didn't have a chance of getting away. The dog was thoroughly alive to its danger. So I am just going to explain what these things mean, because it isn't the crucial point for this question, but I want it to be clear. So this means that the dog was completely aware of how much danger he was in. But it was running on the outer circle, while the wolf pack was running on the inner and shorter circle. It was vain to think of One Ear so outdistancing his pursuers as to be able to cut across their circle in advance of them and to regain the sled. So this is super difficult. It's a really difficult scenario to imagine. It isn't fully explained, and there's some really difficult language. First of all, what are these circles doing? Secondly, do you know what outdistancing his pursuers means? And thirdly, do you know what it means to cut across in advance of the wolves and regain the sled? Right. Rather than explaining all of that to you now, because you won't have me to explain it in an exam, luckily for you, let's look at the options, assuming that you don't quite understand it yet, and let's see how they can help us. So, option A. One Ear was running round the wolves while they circled inside, preventing him from attacking the she-wolf. Well, I'm not going to reread all the rest of the passage up to this point, but if you'd done the questions up to this point and done them intelligently, you would know that One Ear at this point is not trying to attack the she-wolf. He is trying to get away from the she-wolf and all the other wolves. He's realized it was a terrible trap and they were tempting him in. They were, tempting him in. So, so A is definitely not correct because of the phrase attacking the she-wolf. So we can cross out option A. The wolves had surrounded One Ear. Okay, so we can see that One Ear is running and he's sometimes appearing and sometimes disappearing. So that is something which already seems slightly unlikely if he's surrounded by the wolves, penned in, unless they've surrounded him in an absolutely enormous circle and he's running around freely in the middle of it. The dog was running on the outer circle while the wolf pack was running on the inner and shorter circle. That's lines 58 to 60, and it's also quoted in the question. And if you think about that, that really rules out option B. Whatever these circles are, if One Ear is on the outer one and the wolves are on the inner one, they cannot be surrounding him. If anything, he would have to be surrounding them. So B is definitely not correct. Okay. The wolves were circling closer to the sled than One Ear was, preventing him from reaching it. Okay, so we can see if we look down at line 61 that what One Ear would be like, would perhaps like to do is to cut across their circle in advance of them and regain the sled. Even if you don't know all of this language, you can see that broadly what's happening is that One Ear wants to get to the sled, but he can't because of the wolves. So that seems to be a pretty good match for C. Also look at the language. One Ear is on the outer circle, while the wolves are on the inner circle. So it's likely that this is described from Henry's point of view. So it's likely that inner means closer and outer means further away. So that also makes sense of the idea that the wolves are getting in the way of One Ear and stopping him from getting to the sled. So C looks really plausible. So what I might do, actually, I'm at the question mark next to option C to indicate that I'm kind of interested in it. What I don't want to do is circle it yet, because I'm saving that for the right answer, and I don't want to create confusion for myself by circling more than one answer to a question. Option D. Because the wolves were circling behind him, One Ear could not run towards the sled and risk turning his back to them. So that's quite confusing to imagine. Also, sometimes circling round behind One Ear, and One Ear wants to go towards the sled, but in doing so, he'd turn his back on the wolves, which would be dangerous. So this option implicitly means that he's facing towards the wolves and can't turn away from that. That doesn't really seem to match what's going on. In fact, from line 60, we can see that what Ear is aiming to do, would like to do, is to outdistance his pursuers to get further away from them. And even if you're not sure about outdistance, think about out and distance. He wants to make distance between himself and the wolves. And that isn't really compatible with standing there facing them, unless he's running backwards, which wouldn't be a very effective way to make distance. So that's a bit strange. But also, if we look at the text, we can see that the problem for One Ear is that he can't cut across the line of the wolves. In other words, he can't get past the wolves to the sled. Whereas option D suggests that he can run straight towards the sled if only he turns around and puts his back to the wolves. So these are completely different ideas. So option D just throws up too many problems. So we're left picking option C. Now, you may have noticed in all this that one thing I haven't done is actually explain precisely what is happening in the passage. I've left it in a state of confusion to demonstrate how even if you can't picture precisely what's going on, you can still get the right answer if you work carefully through the options and match details from the options with the information that you can work out. So even words like outer and inner and phrases like cut across can give you enough information to get to the right answer with a great degree of confidence, even if you can't see it all in your mind. If you could just read the passage and see the whole situation in your mind, then none of this would be a problem anyway. You just get straight to the answer and you wouldn't need me to explain it. What I am going to do now, though, is just jump to my answer to this question. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Sorry if this is making you dizzy, because I've done a little diagram to help explain what's going on. So as you can see, when you look at this, One Ear to be somewhere off to the side in the woods, and One Ear wants to run away. And what he wants to do is get back to the sled. And you can see the picture of the sled there in the middle. And so in an ideal world, One Ear would just go wham, straight towards the sled where there are humans with guns to protect him. However, he can't do that, because what the wolves do is they keep trying to run between One Ear and the sled. Now, this becomes a kind of part of a circle, because One Ear is always trying to bend in to get back towards the sled. And you can find words to match all of these things in the passage, but my multitasking abilities can't go with explaining this and looking at the diagram and finding the keywords in the passage and doing it all in less than about half an hour. But anyway, if you check the passage afterwards, maybe you rewatch this video if you really want to, you'll be able to match this up with the text. So One Ear is trying to get back towards the sled, which means he's always trying to nudge his way nearer, which makes this outer circle, but the wolves are running just behind him. And you can see from the arrowheads on my diagram, the wolves haven't quite caught up with One Ear, but they're also nearer to the sled than he is. So if One Ear decided to turn back towards the sled, he would run into the front of the line of wolves and get pulled apart. And that's what's meant in line 60 to 61 when it says, look, I am referring to the passage. Amazing. Maybe I can multitask. It says, it was vain to think of One Ear so outdistancing his pursuers, that means getting far enough ahead of them, that he could cut across their circle, cut back towards the sled without them going whoomph and snagging him. So that's what's going on. It's very tricky, but you can get to the answer even if you can't generate a diagram like this in your mind. And I have to say that when I was creating this comprehension, it took me a fair while to get a really precise picture of what was going on to make this diagram. So if you couldn't work this out just from the text, it's not because you're stupid, it's because it's confusing. Okay, right, let's pop out of the screen share and let's have a quick look to see if there are zillions of questions from people saying. No, I don't think there are zillions of questions. Let me just check. Oh no, that's something totally different. Good thing I'm not screen sharing, because I'm showing someone's chats where they're asking me questions, which obviously I shouldn't be sharing with you. Good, okay. Joseph's written, so do I. When you have time and you eliminate, you can actually see if there's another correct answer and try to work out again. Yeah, great. I'm glad people are finding it helpful, even if I'm whiffling and waffling a lot. Right, okay, let's push on. I should say that I'm going to be wrapping up very soon. So if anyone has any overall questions they want to ask, please get them in now. And Saba, if you would very kindly, if there are any questions I should be answering, if you very kindly send them to me via a chat message, I will then deal with them. Okay, right. So let's pluck out something from later on. Let's look at question 22, because this proves a really important point about doing these comprehensions. So I'm going to duck back into the screen share. Okay, and as I said, we'll be looking at question 22. Again, sorry for the dizziness. Okay, so this is a grammar question. And this question says, which of these words is not a verb? And it gives you a list of words. Lost in line 1, right in line 8, alert, line 13, and sniff in line 24. Now, this is the kind of question that is lethally dangerous for somebody who doesn't have good comprehension technique and who just trusts their innate genius to spot the right answer. Oh, doing these Facebook live sessions is also dangerous for my throat. I don't know why I get so scragged up. Anyway, like poor one ear. Because, anyway, jumping back in, because somebody could easily look at these options and say, okay, lost. I got lost. I lost something. Yeah, that's a verb. Okay. Right. Right. That's the opposite of wrong. That isn't a verb. That's an adjective. The right answer. So that's not a verb. Alert. I alert you. Sniff. I sniff the cake. Yeah, it's definitely right. That's the only one that isn't a verb. For example. However, if you think about these words more carefully, they can all be verbs, because you could also, if I knock my glass of water over, I'm not going to do it because I'll make a horrendous mess and destroy the computer, but were I to do so, and then if I were to pick it back up, I would be righting the glass. So that can also be a verb, even though it's a slightly less usual verb than the other options. All these options can also not be verbs. So for example, I felt lost. In that case, lost is an adjective. You are right. Right is an adjective. I heard an alert on the radio. Their alert is a noun. Of course, it can also be an adjective, you know, the alert cat and so on. Robert gave a big sniff. That's a noun as well. So anyway, to cut a very long, probably too long story short, all of these words can be verbs and all of them can be not verbs. So if you just guess, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of being right. You have to look at the passage. Always look at the passage. Always. Right. Maybe that was a bit long-winded, but it's really, really, really important. So we look at the passage, lost in line 1. So we look at line 1, where it says, the day began auspiciously, they had lost no dogs during the night. If you're not certain whether it's a verb, think about some other words that might go there. They had found no dogs during the night. They had fed no dogs during the night. These are all actions. Now, if you don't know what a verb is at all, of course, you'll be stuck on this question. So I am assuming that you know that a verb is, in essence, the word that describes the doing of something. In simple terms, an action. It's not quite that simple, but that's a good enough guideline for us to go with. So lost is clearly a verb. It's something that they had not done to or with the dogs in the night. So lost is a verb. We can cross out option A. I'll do that because otherwise I'll get confused myself. That's another thing to say, actually, which is actually, yeah, it's actually important. All these systems I've been showing with the crossing out and circling and so on, you might well be thinking, these are systems for us because we are children, because we are not as wonderful as the adults teaching us. And of course, if we were really good at comprehension, we wouldn't need to do this and we could skip it. And perhaps when I get to the exam, I'll be brilliant, so I'll be able to skip it then too. That is absolutely not the case. I absolutely promise you that if I were to do a multiple choice comprehension exam today, I would be doing exactly these things, because looking at 4 options and picking the right one is plain difficult. You have to juggle so many ideas in your mind. It's really easy to trick yourself. I would be doing exactly these things. I would be eliminating less likely answers. I would be circling keywords. I would be doing it systematically. If there's a difference between how you might be doing it now and how I would be doing it, it's probably that I would be doing it more quickly. And I would not be doing it more quickly because I am insanely brilliant. I would be doing it more quickly because I have done a lot of these things and I've practiced it, and I have really good systems that enable me to do these things quickly and efficiently. And it's these systematic things that enable me to move at a fast pace through an exam paper. So, big lesson here. Don't assume that you need to learn these habits and then unlearn them to be really fast. What you need to do is learn these habits and then get better and better and faster at them, so you can use exactly these same techniques for any multiple choice tests that you do even in 20 or 30 years' time, and just do them really efficiently. So this is not about these methods are not about condescending to you. They're not about treating you as idiots or even just as children. They're really, really important skills that you'll use in any multiple choice exam that you do in your life. And a sad thing to say, you'll keep doing multiple choice exams. So many job applications and so on involve multiple choice reasoning tests and all that kind of thing. And you just need to get used to it. Life's rubbish. Okay. Right, so goodness me, I'm never going to finish this question. Right, in line 8, this is the last question I'm looking at, don't worry. You don't need to do my madness for too long. The 2 men were bent over the sled and trying to right it. Look, even if you've got no idea what right means in this case, if when I gave the glass of water example, you went, what? Never heard that before. Look at where it is in the sentence. They were trying to right it. And the word to before right is a massive clue that this is a verb infinitive in this case, for what that's worth. Again, if you're not sure, think about other words that might go there. They were trying to clean it. They were trying to unbuckle it. They were trying to feed it. I wouldn't suggest trying to feed a sled, but all these words fit and they're all verbs. Whereas if I try an adjective, they were trying to green it. Really? If I try an adverb, they were trying to speedily it. No. A pronoun, they were trying to me it. Nonsense. It must be a verb, whatever it means. Someone mentioned before thinking a lot about parts of speech when you're trying to work out the meanings of things. Playing with parts of speech, it's a habit you get into. When you start doing it, you'll probably be quite slow. Once you've got used to it, you'll be able to fly through trying out these different options, and you'll very quickly get a sense of what part of speech you're dealing with. Alert in line 13. He slowed down to an alert and mincing walk. What happens if we get rid of and mincing? He slowed down to an alert walk. Walk, we got walk. Walk is a noun. It's linguistically, it's a thing, even if you can't touch a walk. So that's clearly a noun. And so alert is describing the noun. It's telling us about the walk. What kind of walk was it? Was it a long walk? Was it a short walk? Was it a boring walk? No, it was an alert walk. Alert is an adjective. And so alert is not a verb. And so by this point, you actually know that the answer is C. And although I always say you should try all the options, really, if you've done that thought process, you know that the answer is C. You can actually select it and move on to the next question. But I didn't say that. Let's quickly check. Sniff in line 24. He tried to sniff noses with her. Look, it's just like right in line 8. It says to something, which is a massive clue that this is a verb. He tried to sniff noses with her. He tried to rub noses with her. He tried to touch noses. These are all verbs. So sniff is a verb. The answer is alert, option C. And by the by, when I gave my example of how you could completely screw up this question, I suggested that you might land on option B, right, because you think right and wrong. And you would have been wrong. Lord, I tried to make a joke. Remind me never to do that anyway. Yeah, so that would have been an incorrect guess. So even a really logical, sensible seeming guess is very likely to be a complete load of rubbish if you don't do the steps of checking the passage and actually working out the answer like the clever people you are. Good. Social media skills always end with a compliment to your audience. Okay, brilliant. That's me done on talking through these questions. If there's one crucial bit of advice I can share, it's on no account do multiple choice comprehension as slowly as I've been doing it here. Okay, if anyone wants to fire in any crucial questions now, you've got about, I don't know, 15 seconds to do it while I'm looking at these questions. Thank you, Deep, that's really kind. I'm glad you found it fantastic and engaging. I reckon if you cut out the actual useful things I said, you'd probably have about a 10-minute talk in between me whiffling and waffling on and trying to make the technology work. Great, okay. In fact, I am just going to finish with a quick plug. So the fact that you're doing this and you've seen the sample means that you have at least seen the cover of the book that this comes from. If you haven't done so, have a look at the sample paper and do have a look at the answers that come after the questions, because as in all my books, the thing that I'm most proud of here, it's not so much the question paper, it's the answers to the questions and the way that I explain what to do. Hopefully a little bit more clearly than I've done when chatting on here. And there are now 2 multiple choice comprehension books. There's volume 1 and creatively volume 2. They have different coloured covers. If you go on Amazon, you'll see that volume 2 is not shown in stock there. That's because they're not ordering enough books from us. Their mistake. However, if you do want to buy volume 2, you can buy it now on the RSL Educational website and go to the shop part of the website. They're pretty thick books. They're really beefy because there's so much in the answers, and I hope you'll find they're really good value and they'll show you exactly how to do these things. If you do already own volume 1, a special request, please go on to amazon.co.uk and write a review. Reviews are really important. They make all the difference between selling books and books disappearing and never being heard of again. If you own a copy, please go on Amazon tonight or tomorrow or even the day after tomorrow and write even a 1-line review, and I'll love you forever, but I already do. Okay, thank you everybody. It's been a real pleasure. I very much look forward to, oh, someone's just crept in time with a question. They've said, what if both answers are really similar? Crumbs, that's an enormous question. I think I'm going to cheat on this one by saying, why not rewatch part of the talk that I've just given and have a look at what I said about, particularly, yes, have a look at what I said about questions 1 and 2, because those were exactly about that. In question 1, there were 2 options. One option was to do with jollity and enthusiasm. One was about being positive and relaxed. And the only difference between them was that one said full of and one said reasonably. And so you had to work really carefully with the text and with the question to work out which of those was the best match. So have a look back at what I said about question 1 and question 2, and I think you'll get some really good ideas for how to do that. Okay, yep, someone said bye. Quite right. I told Sabra I'd speak for 40 minutes and I've been going for 65 minutes already. Many apologies. It's been lovely to talk to you. And if you've got any more questions, feel free to send me a message and, I'll do my best to answer. Okay, bye everybody.